Hey everyone, welcome to another special edition of the Digital Debate Center. Today we're going to be continuing our discussion of the cyber affirmative. In particular, I'm going to walk you through the two disadvantages that exist within the packet for middle school varsity. So the first disadvantage isn't really a disadvantage at all. We're trying something a little bit different. And what we have here are some case turns. Now a turn says, not only does the plan not solve, but the opposite is in fact true. So the plan tries to deter Russia. Here, there are three reasons, all of which are reasons to vote negative, that says actually the plan makes conflict with Russia more likely. So I'm going to go through each of these three turns. You can treat them like mini disadvantages, and they are all reasons to independently vote negative, right? You would still do impact calculus. You'd still do your same style of debating. It's just they're a little bit smaller. So let's look at the three arguments. The first argument here is the alliance turn. So the Lonergan and Mueller evidence say that the plan fractures the alliance. And the warrant for this evidence is that cyberspace is kind of murky. And the problem is that NATO, if a cyber attack were to happen, would have to decide whether it was a major cyber attack, whether it was a minor cyber attack, whether it crossed the red line. And this piece of evidence says that actually what would happen is that there would be political arguments over who was responsible, stuff like that, and that would fracture the unity that is the foundation of Article 5. Imagine if there's a cyber attack on a hospital in Estonia or a bank in Germany. Does Poland want to become ground zero in a shooting war between Russia and Russia and NATO? Probably not. So the plan, rather than bolstering deterrence, actually reveals that there are some cracks and fissures, that not everyone is on board. And as a result, deterrence would be undermined because Putin might say, actually, maybe an attack on one isn't an attack on all, which means that committing Article 5, which is your strongest, most legitimate tool, to something like cyberspace, maybe isn't the best. This David 7 says that ambiguity is actually good for deterrence, and here's why. The moment you set a red line, what you're really telling Russia is, here's how much you can cyber attack us before there are consequences. So ambiguity means that Putin would actually be more restrained because they don't know where the red line is, or Russia doesn't know where the red line is, and they don't want to risk attack. So this piece of evidence says that actually, rather than deterring cyber attacks, what they do is they cause just a ton of low-level death of 1,000 cuts type deal. So ambiguity, where Putin doesn't know what we're going to do, actually causes more restraint because hackers are afraid of the consequences. And then last but not least is this entanglement turn. It says that the plan would drag us into conflict. Basically, when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. This piece of evidence says that NATO is having Article 5 be our only response to cyber attacks. Russia cyber attacks Estonia, war. Russia cyber attacks France, war. That means that we're probably going to respond with the war. And the plan actually ends up making war more likely because we will end up backing ourselves into a corner where our only response in order to maintain deterrence and the legitimacy of NATO would be to go to war with Russia. That's pretty bad. So instead, we should be more ambiguous and allow ourselves to tailor our response. So now let's talk about the actual disadvantage, as opposed to those case turns. It's the international law disadvantage. Remember, to remind ourselves of what a disadvantage is, its uniqueness, right? Everything's fine right now. There's a link, the plan changes whatever's good about the status quo. We have an internal link, that change leads to some bad stuff. And then we have an impact which says, here's the ultimate negative consequence. Here's why we care. We start off with a unique link, and this Goodman evidence says that currently under international law, there's a definition of an act of war, and it includes use of force and an armed attack. The problem is most cyber attacks don't rise to the level of use of force or armed attack, right? There's no death or destruction. If malware infects my computer, no one dies. So as a result, information warfare is not an armed attack and does not allow self-defense under international law. What does the plan do, though? The plan invokes Article 5, which is a legal part of a treaty, and sets a precedent and says that in actuality, we don't need missiles to be fired. We don't need tanks crossing the border. The definition of armed attack that allows us to respond in self-defense is actually much more expansive. Anything can be an armed attack, or at least any cyber attack can be an armed attack. Now, what's the problem with that? Well, this Schmidt evidence says that currently there's a high threshold before states are allowed to respond in self-defense and use their military. And that's pretty good, right? Because we don't want states going to war over just anything. There's a taboo that says we don't go to war unless absolutely necessary. If we can't use the military in self-defense, except under very specific circumstances. The plan changed that by saying that anything can be an armed attack that allows us to respond with force. So what's the impact? Well, this piece of worth evidence says that other countries look to the United States and look to NATO, and they say, oh, if the definition of armed conflict or what I'm allowed to do in self-defense has changed, if that threshold is lower, and if anything can be an attack, well, then I can invade whoever I want because I can justify any type of aggression under international law. As a result, international law becomes meaningless, states become more aggressive, and the peace that has been created post-World War II by international law declines, and we risk all-out global conflict. So I think these two disadvantages are pretty easy. The turns on case say that the plan makes war more likely, plan undermines deterrence, and the international law disadvantage says that, hey, if anything can allow us to respond in self-defense, then other countries are going to look at that and say, hey, we can use that precedent too, and we can justify going to war. And that means that the long peace, the peace created post-World War II by international law, will start to decline. All right, hope everyone understood those two disadvantages. It seems fairly simple. I can't wait to see y'all at a tournament in the fall.